Dear students, today we are going to study about nomenclature of organic compounds.
There are several methods to naming organic compound. Today we are going to study IUPAC nomenclature system. Why this IUPAC is important? Because before 100 years ago, the scientists have organic compounds by their own naming. There are several classical naming are there. For example, let's consider acids. Carboxylic acid. This is the functional group for carboxylic acid. If there's only hydrogen attached, we call this as a formic acid. And if there are one CH3 group is there, we call acetic acid. There are several that kind of classical names we are using to name for organic compound. But this classical naming is not enough to name all the compounds in organic, because there are infinite number of compounds found in the nature organic compounds. Therefore, we could not able to name every organic compounds in using these classical methods. That is why scientists wanted to identify a new method for nomenclature. Therefore, in 1919, International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry started, and they introduced a new method or new system to name an organic compound. Now we are going to study that naming system. Therefore, after you study this IUPAC nomenclature, you can name every organic compound. If there's a different organic compound, they should have different name. Now let's go how to name an organic compound. Before you are going to study the naming of organic compound or IUPAC nomenclature, you should have some knowledge about the following: priority of functional groups, and prefix and suffix of functional groups, and some numbering systems. That is the prior knowledge you should have before you are going to name an organic compound.
Now let's study classification of functional groups. Before that, I want to mention what is the prefix and suffix when you are considering a name. Let's consider this name. It is in your classroom. So think she can use Miss at the front of her name. Therefore, Miss is the prefix of that name. So then let's consider that Miss Lakmali will go into tuition class after her graduation. So then she can put her qualification at the end of the name. So then that part we can consider as the suffix of that name. Therefore, you can consider what is prefix and suffix for a name. This table you can download from VLE, and I have uploaded in a PDF file. Before you are going to study next part of this lesson, it's better to download that PDF file and better to take a printout, or you can keep a separate document when you are learning this rest part of this lesson. So in this table you can see the functional groups mentioned and their structure also mentioned, and the name when it used as a suffix also mentioned, and also the name when it used as a prefix. Then the right hand side, it mentioned the priority list of the functional groups: carboxylic acid, is the first priority in the functional groups among this table. Second one is ester, then acid halide, and amides and nitrites. Sixth priority goes to aldehyde, then ketone, alcohol, thiol, and amines. Up to that point in this list, that functional groups contain suffix and prefix. But number 11 to 13, alkynes, alkenes, and alkanes, there are no suffix words we are used because that ein, in, or en are used only middle part of the name. Let's consider this one when you are writing down the name. So that contains their prefix names also. Here this alk, the word in the blue color, can replace the number of carbon contains in that group. Let's consider that when you are writing down the name. Here the 14th to 17th, ether, halide, nitro, and diazo like compounds are use only prefix words because including that functional groups to the organic compound, we are not consider that as a special compound. That is only we can consider as sub groups. Therefore, that contains only prefix. You can understand this prefix and suffix and those names when you are writing down a name of an organic compound. Up to now, you should know that suffix and prefix name. Definitely, therefore, you should remember those names, and that is why I mentioned at the beginning of the description of this table, better to download this table in VLE and keep it with you until the end of this lesson. Let's consider the numbering system in organic compound nomenclature. 1. Meth, 2. Eth, prop, but, pent, hex, hept, oct, non, dec. This is 1 to 10, the numerical system in Greek. Here, this words is the hydrocarbon prefix number according to the number of carbon in that hydrocarbon. But when you are considering 1 to 10, if there's a prefix, number of functional groups are there, when you are counting that number of functional groups, you can put the number as one time only it contains, we call mono, or we cannot use this mono word. Or second, that means if you have twice the same group, we can put di. If you have thrice in the same group, we can tri. 4 times we can put tetra, penta, hexa, hepta, octa, nona, and deca. That is the number system. When you have number of functional groups, we have to put the how many number of functional groups are there according to that numerical system. Therefore, you should remember these numbers up to 10, but after 11 onwards, it's better to find out from other references, and please take in your mind those numerical system when you are writing down an organic compound. Next, let's consider the steps you have to follow when you are naming an organic compound. First one is find the longest carbon chain. Second one, find the number of carbon in the longest chain. Third one, find the principal functional groups. That principal functional group means the highest priority group in the list. Now you have the list with you, and then you can find out what is the principal functional group in that compound. Fourth one, find the subfunctional groups and substitute alkyl groups in the compound. Fifth one, number the longest carbon chain from one end to other end. Then carbon that connect to the principal functional group should take the lowest number. Then you know the number of the carbon, every carbon in the carbon chain. Therefore, then you are ready to name the organic compound. Let's consider these points with an example. Then you can understand easily how to name that organic compound. Therefore, please these 5 steps remember before you are going to start the naming of an organic compound. Then when you are writing down a name, first before you are going to write the subgroup in alphabetical order, you have to mention. When you are mentioning that subgroups at the beginning of the name in the organic compound, here first you have to mention the number of the carbon at which the functional group attach. Next, the count prefix for number of functional groups you have to mention. Next one, the prefix word of that functional group you have to mention. So there are 5 subgroups attached to the same compound. You have to write down these kind of 5 functional group names in an alphabetical order. After finishing these subgroups, you have to write down the latter part of the name. Here, when you write down the latter part of the name, you have to write the principal functional group along with the carbon chain. Here, first you have to mention the number we call hydrocarbon prefix number of the carbon, as we studied in the previous slide. And next one, the number of the carbon at which the alkene or alkyne group connect. If there's an alkene or alkyne group, that means double bond or triple bond is there. You have to mention that carbon number, and then you have to mention the infix. When you consider infix, you have to mention if there's an alkane, there's only single bonds are there, you have to put AN. If there's a double bond, you have to put EN. And if there's a triple bond, you have to mention YN. Then you have to consider the principal functional group. That number of the carbon at which the major functional group attach, you have to mention. And then the suffix of the principal functional group you have to write down at the end of the name. Normally we can put this number, carbon number, which the major functional group connect to the carbon chain, at the beginning of the name also. Therefore, we can remove this N, and then you can add in front of the name.
Now let's consider the combining of these two, the front part and the latter part of the name. Consider there's an organic compound which has only one functional group. Then you have to consider only the latter part of this compound. What you have to write down, the hydrocarbon prefix and the number where the ene or ine group attach, then that infix whether it is an, ene or ine, and the number where the major functional group attach, suffix of that major functional group. But if there's a compound which contains more than one functional group, then you have to consider other functional group as the sub-functional groups, and you have to select only one as a major functional group. Then other sub-functional group you have to add in front of this name by adding the number of carbon at which the functional group attached, then count prefix for number of functional groups and the prefix of that sub-functional group. Then you have to add all the sub-functional groups according to the alphabetical order. Then you can finish the name of that organic compound. You can understand this by taking examples. First we can take a simple example which contains only one functional group. Then we can go to complex compound which contains more than one functional groups. Then according to that examples you can easily understand how you can write down a name of an organic compound. In this example I will take some simple compound which contains only hydrocarbons for alkanes. For that kind of compound we don't need to add sub-functional group at the beginning, therefore latter part also only we can consider. So how you write down the latter part of them? Number, where this we have learned earlier, and the carbon number which attached to infix, and whether it is in or ein or en, and then the number which attach the functional group, major functional group, and that suffix. But in alkane there are infix we can consider as an. Then I write down an because there's no double bond or triple bond attached to that carbon, therefore we can put an for alkanes, and then we can remove that name when used as a suffix because there's no other functional group attached in the alkanes, therefore I remove that part and I can put e at the end of this name. Therefore this is the normal structure for alkane naming. For example, this is the simplest alkane. We call methane, meth for the number of carbon, ane for alkane, e there's no any other functional group. And here ethane, this is propane, this contains 4 carbon, therefore butane. This contains 5 carbon, therefore we can add pentane. Here 8 carbon, octane. Therefore you can name different kind of alkanes according to the number of carbon attached there. Here I take only the single chain alkanes. If there's a branch chain alkanes, you can consider different names. You can understand that names later while you are learning of the complex compound nomenclature. As a second example, I will take alkene. In alkene also we have to consider only the latter part of that naming. It also contains prefix of the number of carbon and then infix and also suffix as we learned earlier. For alkene it contains double bond, therefore this double bond should contain at 1 carbon, therefore in the infix should be en. Then other functional groups are not attached to the alkenes, therefore I remove that and add e at the end of this name. Let's consider this example. For when you are considering this example, first we have to give numbers for this carbon because we have to consider this n. This n you have to consider, therefore for this n you have to add a number. Therefore I will number this carbon 1, 2, 3, or you also can number this carbon as 1, 2, 3. But 1 should be at the very first of the major functional group. Here the major functional group in this compound is alkene group. Therefore 1 should appear at the double bond. Therefore the down numbering system is correct, but upper numbering system is wrong. Therefore you can remove that upper numbering system in this molecule, and the down numbering system is the correct numbering system because it appear 1 at the ene or double bond. Here this is the name of this compound. Prop for the number of carbon in this compound. 1 is the first carbon attached to this double bond, and ene is therefore because there are 1 double bond, and E to end this name. And here the same, this compound also you can number 1 to 4 because there are 4 carbon. You can add 1, 2, 3, 4. Now if you number this compound in the other side also, you can obtain 2 for the double bond. Therefore both side is correct in this kind of compound. However, in this numbering system also contains the lowest number for double bond. Therefore we can name this compound as but2ene. This is the name of this compound. Then I think you can understand how to name an alkene. The third example, I will take alkynes. I will take only one example for alkyne. This is also we have to consider only the latter part of this naming system. Here this is the normal way you have to write down if contains only one functional group. Here the infix you have to consider as yn because there are triple bond attached to this compound, and rest part we can remove, we can put E for in this name. Then this is the example. You have alkyne group. Here this one also you have to number 1, 2, 3, 4. This numbering system obtain the lowest number for triple bond carbon. Then you can put the name. There are 4 carbon, then you have to put but, and 1 for the carbon, the lowest carbon number which attached triple bond, then E to end this compound. Therefore we can name this alkyne as but1ene, or also we can write down this name as 1-butyne. 1-butyne also the correct for this name. 1-butyne is also correct name when you are naming this kind of compound. As I mentioned earlier, this 1 we can put in front of the name if there are no any other numerical values in the same compound. Now let's consider another simple organic compound which contains only one functional group, alcohol. Here this is the example I will take. In this compound contains only single functional group only. Therefore we can consider this as an alcohol. Then you have to consider the numbering system for this carbon chain. You can write down 1, 2, 3, 4, or you can write down other side also. But other side is wrong. Why? Because for major functional group should attach to the lowest number of this carbon chain. Therefore this is the correct way of the numbering of this carbon chain. Then you have to write down the latter part of the naming. So then number with it or prop, here there are 4, therefore we can write down as but. Then infix, and n attached to the infix, but here there are no double bond, no triple bond, therefore you can write down an for that infix part. Then the number where the major functional group attached is 2, and the suffix of the major functional group we know that for OH group, we add suffix as OL. Therefore, this is the name of this compound. We call butan-2-ol. O, only number we have is 2. Therefore, we can take in front of this name and we can write down this compound as 2-butanol. This is also correct name for this compound. And consider another example which contains the same compound as we mentioned in the above, but this compound contain a double bond. Here, when you are numbering, this is same as the previous one, 1 2 3 4. Why the major functional group is OH, it should have the lowest number for carbon. Therefore, numbering system is okay. Then how you write down this one? First, you have to add but for represent 4 carbon of this carbon chain. Next, 3 is the first carbon which attach in or double bond. Then infix also include in this one, 3 in, and then 2 where hydroxy group attach, and ol for the suffix of this hydroxy group. Therefore, this compound name is but 3 in 2-ol. Here, this compound can write only this way because there are two numbers. Therefore, you can't take these two numbers in front of this name. Therefore, this compound name is but 3 in 2-ol. Consider some kind of complex compound, and let's start at the beginning of writing down an organic compound name. Here, this is some kind of complex compound. There are several functional groups attached to this compound. Therefore, first thing you have to find the longest carbon chain. Here, therefore, you have to find the longest carbon chain in this compound. I will consider this is the longest carbon chain in this compound. Now I find out longest carbon chain. Next part, find the number of carbon in the longest chain. How many number of there? 1 2 3 4 5 6 carbons are there. Find the principal functional group, the highest priority group in the list. So therefore, before you are going to find out the principal functional group, you have to find out what are the functional groups attached to this compound. Then let's start. This is one functional group. This one, another group attached to this carbon chain. This is another group. This is another group, and this is another group, and this is also another functional group attached. This is another subgroup. Here there are 7 functional groups attached to this carbon chain. Now let's going to find out what is the major functional group. When you find out in your list of the functional group, here this one we call aldehyde. Aldehyde group is attached to this compound. Therefore, the major functional group we call this aldehyde. Others are, then we can consider the sub-functional groups. Therefore, now we find out functional groups, major functional groups, and also the sub-functional groups. Then number the longest carbon chain from one end to other end, where the carbon that connect to the principal functional group should take the lowest number. Therefore, you have to start the numbering of this carbon chain at this point. This is the first carbon attached to this one. 2 3 4 5 6. Then we finish the numbering of this carbon chain. Now let's start the naming of this compound. First thing, N we add number and prefix of the subgroups. So then let's start to name the subgroups and according to the alphabetical order. Now we have 1, this is also same group, 2, same group, 3 and 4. 4 type of subgroups attached to this compound. Then let's start to write down the name of these compounds, these groups. One is methyl, meth for 1 carbon and yl for alkyl group. Methyl group is there. 2, chloro group. 3, bromo. 4 is hydroxy. Now we know the 4 sub-functional groups attached to this compound. Then let's arrange these 4 compounds according to the alphabetical order. Therefore, the first priority goes to bromo because B is the starting at this compound name. Chloro is the C, therefore second, and hydroxy is the third, and this should be fourth, 4 according to the alphabetical order. Therefore, now start bromo. How many bromo are there? Only 1 bromo compound. Therefore, we can start naming this compound. We can start this naming of this compound. Three single, therefore number you have to add mono, or you can just put bromo. Next one, chloro. Here there are 2 chloro compound. Therefore, what are the attached carbon number is 4, and other also attached to other 4 carbon. Therefore, 4 dichloro, because there are 2 chloro groups attached to this carbon chain. Then third one is hydroxy. There are only 1 hydroxy, therefore it's attached to third carbon group, 3 hydroxy. Then I will put in the downward methyl group. Methyl group attached to 3 and 5. 3, 5 dimethyl. Okay, now then let's start the final part. Then let's go into name the major functional groups and the carbon chain. The number attached to this one is 6 carbon atoms are there. Therefore, I'll put hex and N and infix. There are no infix, therefore I will put AN, because no double bond or triple bond attached to this compound. And N and the suffix of major functional group. N is 1, therefore I will not put 1, because 1 we can neglect. This N you can write down this as 1 and the suffix as L, or you can write down without this 1 also, because 1 we can neglect. Therefore, again I will write down the name of this compound, 3 bromo, 4 dichloro, 3 hydroxy, 3 5 dimethyl hex Personnel. That is the name of this compound. Now I think you can write down any name of any compound by using following these steps. Now let's consider another example of ester. Here this is ester compound. Then this also contains more than one functional group. Therefore, first you have to write down to find the longest carbon chain. So therefore, in this carbon chain, when you find out this carbon chain, here this is a carbon. Therefore, you have to take the longest carbon chain in this compound is this one. This is the longest carbon chain you can appear in this compound. And then you have to find out the number of carbons in the longest carbon chain. Here you have to number 1, 2, 3 and 4. Then next part is find the principal functional group and also subgroup in this compound. For when you are considering functional groups, other substitutional groups, you have to consider what are the major functional group. Here this is the major functional group attached to this compound, and also this group other part, and here OH group attached and CH3 group attached to this compound. Therefore 4 groups are there. Now when you are naming these groups, all groups you have to consider. Then other subgroups also we identified. The major functional group is ester and others are we call sub-functional groups. And then number the longest carbon chain from one end to other end, as you have to take the lowest number for the major functional group. Now I have already numbered this carbon chain. 1 comes to the ester carbon. Therefore, this is the correct way of the number. So then let's consider the n, number and prefix. That part you have to mention. Here when you are naming this one, this is hydroxy group, this is alkyl group, in here this alk, for alk you have to add eth because there are 2 carbon, therefore we call this as ethyl group. And this one we can say methyl group. Therefore we have hydroxy group, methyl group and ethyl group. Among these 3 sub-functional group, the lowest value we have to consider E and then H and M. That is the alphabetical order. But when you write down this ethyl, you can't write the carbon number for this ethyl group. Why? Because this ethyl group directly connect to oxygen, not a carbon atom. Therefore you can't write down a number for ethyl group. That is why we have to consider this as an special case. Therefore, when any group attached to an oxygen compound, oxygen atom, we have to consider that part at the beginning. Therefore, you have to write down this ethyl part at front. Ethyl. Then you have to keep a space. Then you have to write the other functional group names. Among the hydroxy and methyl, you have to consider first hydroxy because H is the first alphabetical character. Therefore, hydroxy is attached to 3 hydroxy and 3 methyl, and then you have to write down the major functional group name. So then you have to consider how many numbers are there. 4. Therefore you have to consider but as the number. This is already we finish, and then the number you have to write down is but, and then in an infix there's no infix are there, therefore you have to write down as a in. There's no infix because there's no double bond or triple bond in the major function carbon chain. Next, in where the major functional group attach and the suffix. Here you can write down 1 as the carbon and O8 as the suffix of this major functional group. Also you can remove this 1 from this name because we can consider 1 as neglect. Therefore you can write down this name again, ethyl 3 hydroxy 3 methyl butanoate. Ethyl 3 hydroxy 3 methyl butanoate is the name of this compound. Now I think when and subfunctional group attached to oxygen, you have to take in front of this name, and there's no carbon number you have to add. That is also important thing when you are taking this example you have to consider. Then I think you can write down this kind of complex compound. Then how to write down the IUPAC name of this kind of compound.
Now let's take this example. This is an amine compound. For this one, I will consider what are those functional groups. When you are considering functional groups, there's a amine compound here. Amine functional group is there. And next one, chlorine methyl. And another one methyl is there. So therefore, there are compounds. In this compound, we have 3 type of functional group. This one is we call chloro, here methyl, meth, and YL. As in your table, it mentioned as alkyl group. In this alk, we can use methyl. Here also methyl, and this one is we call amine. Now let's go what you have to find the longest carbon chain. Here, as you know, the longest carbon chain contains 3 carbon, 1, 2, 3. Why I put 1 to that carbon? Because as you know, the principal functional group should be appear the lowest carbon number. Therefore, when you numbering this carbon chain, 1 goes for carbon which attach the amine group. Then second one, find the number of carbon in the longest chain. There are 3, and find the principal functional group, highest priority. According to this 3 functional group, the amine is the highest priority. Therefore, this is an amine compound. And find the subfunctional groups and substitute alkyl groups are already identified. And then number the longest carbon chain from one end to other end, which the principal functional group attached to the lowest carbon number. So then we already finished that points. Then let's write down the name in numbers and prefix for subfunctional groups. So here there are 2 subfunctional group, one methyl, other one is chlorine. Therefore, I have to put first chlorine, then second methyl. Why? M is the, according to alphabetical order we have to take. Then we will write down this name chloro attached to 2, therefore 2 chloro, 2 chloro dash. Then what is the number for methyl? There are two methyl group, one attached to N, other one attached to 2. Why I put N here? Because for this methyl group we can't put a carbon number. Why? Because this directly attached to nitrogen, therefore we can put the number as N, capital N, for groups which attach to nitrogen. Then second methyl group attached to second carbon, therefore 2 I have added, so therefore 2 dimethyl. Now I finish the sub-functional groups, then the major functional group and the major carbon chain, number and infix and suffix for major functional group. That is we have to do. Here the number, when you write down, there are 3, therefore prop we can write prop the number part. Okay, then in an infix we can add an because there's no double bond and triple bond, and then number and suffix. Here you can write down 1, amine as the suffix for, therefore you can write down this is 1 clearly, 2 chloro in 2 dimethyl propanamine. You can remove 1 because it is 1 we can neglect. Both are correct. So then I think you can understand what are the numbering systems and prefix and infix and suffix and numerical values add into those kind of nomenclature. Then now let's take the summary of nomenclature of organic compound. First you have to write down the subgroup attached to the major carbon chain. For that subgroup naming, first you have to add the number of carbon at which the functional group attached. It may be 1, 2, 3, 4 like carbon number, or N for nitrogen, or if they attach directly to oxygen, you have to take space and get in front of that nomenclature. Then numerical prefix for number of functional groups attached in the same functional group. You have to write down whether it is mono or without any prefix for one functional group. Then di, tri, tetra, penta, hexa, hepta or octa like numbers, how many sub-functional group attached. Then the prefix of that sub-functional group you have to write down according to the table I have mentioned earlier. Mention what's the prefix of that functional group. It may be carboxy, fluoro, chloro, formyl, oxo, hydroxy, methyl, like prefix you can use. So then you have to repeat that number of sub-functional group according to the alphabetical order. So then you have to write down every sub-functional group in order to alphabetical order. Then after you finish all sub-functional groups, then you have to start major functional group naming. Then number, that hydrocarbon prefix number of carbon, it may be meth, eth, prop, but, pent, hex, hept, oct like prefix you can use. Then You have to consider the infix, the carbon number at which the alkene or alkyne group attach. It may be 1, 2, 3, or sometimes N, or their infix number N, in, or I. And next, the carbon number at which the major functional group attach. It may be 1, 2, 3, 4, and suffix of the major functional group. As mentioned in the table, it may be oic acid, oate, oil halide, amines, aldehyde, on, ol, like suffix you can put at the end. So therefore, that is the summary of how you write down the name of an organic compound. Thank you very much for listening this lecture. So now I think you can have a good knowledge how to name an organic compound. This is very important for you, because if you have find any organic compound, now you have a good idea, good knowledge how to write down the name of that compound. It is very important when you are learning in future detailed lessons in organic chemistry. Thank you very much.